Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Storytects, where imagination meets structure and where stories aren't just told, they're built. I'm Ralph Lucchese, your host, and today we have a guest who doesn't just tell stories, he architects them into entire ecosystems. He's a transmedia expert, professor, he's an author, producer, a creative strategist who has worked with major studios, global brands, and independent creators alike. His expertise lies in expanding stories beyond a single medium, turning them into full-fledged franchises that captivate audiences across multiple platforms. You might know him from his books, including You're Gonna Need a Bigger Story, one of my favorites, or from his work with companies like Disney, Mattel, and EA. I first met him as my mentor at the Los Angeles Film School, and his insights completely changed the way I approach storytelling. But beyond being an incredible educator, he's also a sought after speaker and the founder of 1-3 Creative, where he helps storytellers think bigger, smarter, and more strategically about their own IP. So today we're going to dive into the world of transmedia storytelling, the evolving entertainment landscape, and how creators can future proof their stories in an industry that's changing faster than ever. So buckle up. This is going to be a masterclass in storytelling from definitely one in the business. Houston Howard, welcome to Storytects.
Nice to be here. I'm super excited.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited. I kind of want to jump into it with you in regards to your history. You have a pretty incredible background coming from the producing side, but not only the producing side, but the legal side of things as well in the industry. So
Sure.
take me through your early career of what got Houston Howard to one producing, but then making that shift to transmedia storytelling and transmedia producing as well.
Sure. So I've always been a heavy, diverse creative my whole life. As a kid, I was a big. I grew up a kid in the '80s and the '90s, and I was a kind of kid in the '80s. Grew up in the '90s, and so I was cutting my teeth in all the big franchisey stuff. I was Star Wars fan, Lord of the Rings fan. Uh, uh, He-Man, GI Joe, all that stuff of the late '80s, early '90s. That's what I grew up on. I was a heavy reader, heavy writer. Played thousands of hours of tabletop board games when I was a kid. In high school, when I was in college, I wrote for the stage. I invented board games and tried to sell them off for manufacturers in college. But then I ended up going to law school. I was really interested in entertainment. I was really interested in just being in the space, and that seemed like a good path for me. So I focused my legal career through school on entertainment law. While I was in law school, while everybody else was studying, I was making friends with people at the film school who at the same university, and I was writing and producing films while I was in law school, and graduated and focused on entertainment and IP litigation, and it was very exciting and interesting work. Really focused primarily on courtroom litigation. Once IP litigation gets to a certain point, got to go into a courtroom. I was what's called I won the Virginia Trial Lawyers Award, which is one of the like the blue chip trial lawyers come out of school, and it was very exciting. So much to my mother's and mother-in-law's chagrin, soon after starting my law career, decided to not be a lawyer anymore, and decided to make that shift on the other side of the transaction, because I just always had the creative bug. I was drawn to the model. I was drawn to the industry. That seemed like the most reasonable way to the industry. But at the end of the day, it was interesting. I mean, it was I was posed a question that was, what would you do if you knew you could never fail? And when I honestly asked myself that, the answer to that question wasn't I'd be in a courtroom arguing about a contract. That was not the answer to the question. And so the answer to the question is I'd make movies all day, and I'd write books, and I would create stuff. And me and my wife were just very much those type of people. Like, regret is one of the worst things that you can experience as a human being. And so, let's figure it out. We sold our place in Virginia. We sold everything we had. We piled everything into our little Jetta and just drove to LA and decided to, figure it out. And, I wanted to, my initial thoughts were to go to film school. And so, I was on the fast track to the Stark producing program in USC. But but I realized how many student loans I had going through law school, so decided not to take on more student loans going to film school. So I just decided to kind of self-start it all and self-educate and try to kind of bootstrap my way up, and that's ultimately kind of how I ended up doing what I was doing.
That's interesting. I kind of want to piggyback off of this, the lawyer aspect. So you come from this legal background. I'm curious because I come from like a military background, right? So
Sure.
my version of creative is vastly different. Like the things I put into work from a creative side and my process is different. You coming from the legal side of things, right? Like it's the law, like it is what it is, like it's black and white, like it's paper here, so on and so forth. Taking that, how does that influence the way that you then craft story?
Sure.
You go about approaching IP to turn it into something more? Because I would imagine you're starting off with an idea, but because you've been in the courtrooms, you've been in the back offices, these handshake deals that go down and things like that, you see it from a different perspective. So that has to conform the way that you then go about approaching your own personal stories and your own personal IP.
Absolutely. I mean, there are there's definitely very practical lessons learned of how to approach rights deals and how to approach negotiations and all that, really. But really, the thing about law school is law school doesn't teach you the law. That's what the biggest misconception about law school is: you learn the law in law school. You don't. What law school does is it opens up your brain and rearrange, or opens up your head and rearranges your brain in a way that you think completely differently. It teaches you to think critically. It teaches you to sort of forensically separate things and examine the component parts, put it back together, and that's something that doesn't come natural to most people. And law school was really expensive thinking school, and so then when I got into entertainment, what was great, yeah, of course, I learned how a contract is made and how to structure a deal and things like that. But the biggest benefit is being able to ask tough questions, be able to look at something like the entertainment model and the model of IP and the model of Hollywood and see it and the way it's been working for 150 years. Like I was able to look at that and say that kind of doesn't make sense. And what if we rearrange the way some of this is done, and let's like reapproach it from this different direction. And especially not going through film school and kind of going through the ranks that most people would go through. I was able to not only come in as an outsider with a fresh perspective, but come in as an outsider with a fresh perspective who went to thinking school that allowed me to think critically about all of it and say, well, what if we did this, and what if we did this, and what if we did this? And I didn't know enough to know that I wasn't even supposed to ask those questions. So I just asked those questions and started to kind of meddle and monkey around with stuff. And it was, and that kind of put me on the path of where I am. So it's just the ability, when you get into a lane that's been well trodden and established for 100 years, and everybody does the same thing, and everybody in Hollywood always uses the same contract and the same model, the same template every single time, and it's just it's interesting when you come in as a disruptor, and I wasn't even intentionally trying to be a disruptor, and I'm not even saying I necessarily am a disruptor, but it's been that mentality, looking at things with that mentality, and say, well, what if we just did it a little bit different? What if we reapproach this? Let's pull this model apart, look at its component parts, and then see why it's put together this way, and can we swap this out for this other thing and kind of put it back together? And that's I've figured out how to turn that into a career, which is bizarre, but that's it's a fascinating perspective to take.
Yeah, it's critically thinking creatively, which is
Yes.
like they're polarizing things somehow working in tandem with each other,
Right.
and clearly it works.
Sure.
Um, because you have the career to back it. I I'm so curious. So you said your wife, right? So your wife is a part of the endeavor in the creative world. I don't want to take it away from you, but
Sure.
your wife's in the entertainment field as well.
She was, since we had a couple kids. She's been like really homeschool mom focused for 5-6 years now, and so she's kind of heads down. Though she did, when we started, we always operated as a team, and so she comes from a marketing and PR background, and she had a lot of really good insights into a different aspect of the industry that I didn't understand as far as the marketing of it. But when you get into the entertainment, you realize the marketing is just a vital part of it. And so we were able to kind of tag team a lot of really interesting projects, and tag team a lot of really interesting questions of saying, what if we did this differently and do this differently? And she's been just a great asset for me, just as in life, but also in business, for sure.
And to bounce ideas off, that's awesome. That's
And she
incredible.
hates all my ideas. Like she's like she's like the toughest. Like I have zero ego, primarily because of her, because she's notoriously difficult. Everybody else will love his stuff. She's like, yeah, I think it's boring. Got to go back. It's got to punch it up. So it's good to have somebody keep you in check like that. It's super fun.
That's awesome. You're someone that's developed clearly a process that works. You get to work with some of the biggest names in the industry.
Yeah.
I spoke to Jeff Gomez on the last episode to kind of take apart his process and see what he does going into storytelling, like his approach to it, and he really dives into the psychological aspects. Take me through your process when Houston approaches a story or approaches an IP or is in front of something like this. I don't want to say what's the first thing you do, because I feel like that's kind of like I don't want to call you out, because there's obviously a lot of factors that come into play. But how do you approach these IPs with your skill set to take it on as your own and develop it into something different and into a transmedia environment, to a transmedia universe?
Right. Yeah. So, I'm a systems guy. Like, I'm a process guy. I'm a systems guy. And that's the way I think. When I first got into the transmedia space, it really wasn't me being very determined of, like, I'm going to be a transmedia producer. I didn't even know there was a word for that. All I wanted to do really was make things that I was a fan of. And again, growing up in being a kid in the 80s and seeing how things started to cross platform and the big franchises that I was a fan of, like I wanted to do that. And I remember when I was in law school, I was producing a film, and I wrote and produced it. And it was a really interesting film that didn't have a lot of dialogue, and it was sort of this kind of this moody supernatural thing, and you don't get into the character's head a ton. You see him do these interesting things, but you don't get into his head a ton. So I wanted an original theme song produced for the title track, produced for the film. So I was working with the songwriter, and I thought, well, what's interesting about music is that the benefit of music and the advantage of music is that you can get into the head of a character really well, and that's what music does. It gets into the heart, gets into the head really well. So what if we produced a song that was the title track, but the verses actually were the thoughts of the main character in the film that you're not getting from the film, because film is outside in rather than inside out. And all of a sudden now the song can go with the film in this really interesting way, and they can work together. and then I thought, well, from a producer standpoint, it may be kind of cool when we shoot the music video, to shoot the music video while we're shooting the film, because then we can use some of the same sets and use the setups there and kind of have this visual identity that is very consistent throughout the same lighting and all that stuff. And then I thought, well, what'd be kind of interesting is, like, what if then we had the actors also in the background of the music video doing the stuff they do in the film. And then I thought, well, what if they were doing something different in the film? Ooh, what if the music video actually had like a deleted scene from that was in the video that you don't see in the film? So not only does the song go with be it like an extra component to the film, but the video is an extra component that goes along with the film, and they all kind of work together in this really interesting way. And it drove my director completely mad, and like it was like logistics to figure out, but like, I didn't know that was transmedia. I didn't know that you weren't supposed to do that. It made intuitive sense to me because I've always been a sort of a, what about this guy? What about that guy? And so, like, how do I pull the pieces together? So then when I got to Hollywood, like, that's the stuff I wanted to do. And I had an interest in games. I'd developed games before. I'd written for the stage before. I'd written poetry before. I had a buddy who was a songwriter. I had a buddy who was a technology guy and a comic book guy. And so it just always made intuitive sense for me to say, well, why don't we like add that to it? And why don't we add that to it? And why don't we add that to it? And then all of a sudden we get stuff like it was like we had in the 80s, that was that multi-platform stuff. And I had no idea that people like Jeff Gomez were out there blazing a trail and doing these amazing things in this space. No clue. And then it wasn't until I realized how difficult it was and how the first couple things weren't that good that I then realized, okay, this whole thing is its own discipline. This whole thing is its own specialty. And I'm going to use my lawyer superpowers and my thinking school degree to go and essentially forensically audit as many multi-platform projects as I can audit. I'm going to look at them all, and I'm going to look at what they did well and what they didn't. What are the similarities? What are the trends? What are the creative decisions that they shared? What are the business decisions that they shared? And I'm just going to figure out, what makes these things work. And I was able to pull together a rubric for my own head. And so then it became, I became super intuitive of the inner workings creatively, business-wise, logistically of these multi-platform franchises, of how can the engine be optimized. And once I became intuitive like that, then all of a sudden I was able to help other people diagnose stuff. Like, my father-in-law was a football coach, and I don't know if you've ever watched a football game with a football coach, but football coaches watch football completely differently than a fan watches football. Right. And so I'm sitting there watching the game with him, and we're just, I'm looking at certain things, and then I realize he's looking at very different things, and he's seeing the game. He's seeing the matrix, so to speak, that's underneath the whole game. And it's because he has this trained eye. So I was able to get to that point to where I was able to say, yeah, like that, that's the project we need to work on, and this is what's wrong with it, and there's how we can fix it. And I never really meant to be a consultant or anything like that, but I wrote a book. I got an advice from one of the richest men in LA. He said, early in my career, he encouraged me to write a book about something I knew about, because he said that would help establish you as an expert. And that will, that'll have a lot of business benefit to you. And so I listened to him, wrote my first book called Make Your Story Really Stinking Big. It was published by Michael Weesey. I was a big fan of their film book line. And I was super enthused with that. 2 weeks after that book hit the shelves, I was contacted by Dave Voss, who was the senior VP of Product and Design, I think it was, at Mattel. And they said, hey, why don't you come in and talk to us about a project? And I, I never even considered that before. I just wanted to like make my own stuff. Right. And so I'll never forget when I went in. I thought I was just going in to have a meeting with this guy, and I was sitting out in this hallway, and I realized I was one of many people they were calling in to examine this particular project. And there was a company that was in before me, and I could hear the bass of like whatever video that they're showing the Mattel creative team, like, and it was like rumbling, and they were showing this reel, and they were showing all these amazing case studies, and it was Ridley Scott's Transmedia company in there, like you making a play for the same project. And I was like, oh man, like this, I'm hosed because I don't have anything. I don't have a reel. I don't have a portfolio. I got some interesting ideas, and I got this book, and like I got this rubric, and so I was like, well, it's fun to be inside Mattel, I guess, for this one time. Well, I go into this into the conference room, and there's 14 or 15 Mattel creative executives are on this gigantic table. I'm at the end of it, and we start talking about a project. And they said, "This is what we have. This is what we're dealing with. Tell us about yourself, and you have anything to show us?" I said, "No, I don't have anything to show you. I didn't bring anything. I got some interesting ideas. I got this rubric. I don't have anything else." And I said, "What do you have? Like, let's talk about the project." And we sat there for 3.5 hours, and they were talking to me about their project, and I was able to say, "Oh yeah, well that's." The reason that's not working is because you didn't do this, and maybe if you connected it over here, maybe you could spin it this way, and all of a sudden, if you like rearranged this order and added this and changed this, and all of a sudden you kind of bring everything in line, and it was interesting walking out. He was like, nobody's been able to do that so far today. Like everybody else was showing me everything that they would do, but no one's able to kind of diagnose the issue that we're dealing with and then have the prescription of how to fix it. And there's a lot of people that can make us cool stuff, but like we need to fix our problem. And so that kind of, became like this weird superpower of mine, and saying, okay, yeah, let me see what you have. Let's pull it apart, see the component parts, put it back together, and Rubik's cube it in a way that, eventually you kind of end up like with a nice looking Rubik's cube. And so that ended up, putting me with Mattel, and that spurred into several things with Mattel, and then once that happened, it kind of continued to kind of escalate and snowball into a lot of fascinating things across not just film and television, but animation and video games, and publishing, and the whole lot of it, which is really cool, because at the end of the day, the game isn't film, the game isn't animation, the game isn't video games, the game is IP. And how do we make IP work? And this was 15 years ago when IP wasn't even as important as it is now. Like now, IP is the whole game, and it's and what that's done is it allowed me, to not just to now to be at the right place at the right time with the right skill set, so that now I'm at a point where IP is the entire game in this crazy commoditized entertainment environment. Now I've been able to be positioned in a way that I think I can help people, and that's that's been a really cool thing, to be able to empower creators and empower writers and empower filmmakers and empower people to be able to navigate this crazy world that we're in. And so I have no idea if that answered your question, but that's ultimately kind of how that's how I approach everything. Is how do I pull it apart, see it, and kind of then start Rubik's cubing it, and in a way that kind of puts it all back together, and then adds the things that you don't have, and ultimately, invariably there's a couple things that usually people miss, and some practical things. But I'm a super practical, tactical guy. I'm when I first started going to Transmedia events and meetups and things like that, like in the space, and those super smart people that are brilliant and interesting and academic, and I would go, and sometimes I would be frustrated with how much of the transmedia conversation was rooted in academia. And not that it shouldn't have been. I think that was a good place for it to start. But there was a point where for me, I'm like, okay, I want to make stuff. I want to be super practical. How do I push this out in a way that I can do and that I can help others do? And there wasn't a lot of that out there at first because they went through a stage when Transmedia was really coming back into into the marketplace. It wasn't a new thing; it was an old thing that was coming back in this new way. And I think the Bible was the first form of transmedia, thousands of years ago. So the transmedia philosophy has been around for forever. But now that it was coming back, I think it needed to go through a stage of questions and thought. But where I hit it at a time where it became all about practicality. And so I'm very much always positioned myself of like, let's get in the trenches, let's figure this out, let's boots on the ground it, and let's figure out the practical things that we need to do to be able to move something forward and optimize it for a 21st century entertainment environment.
I like that. And that's kind of how I view a lot of projects too. Like I call it like creative realism, where it's like, look, we can be as creative as we want. Let's go off the deep end. Let's go crazy. And then at the end of all this, now we have a realistic approach to this. And
Sure.
how do we go about actually bringing it to light?
Yeah.
Because I think that's lost, right? Like I think it's very hard, especially in today's environment. If you're creative, you're kind of focused. You're strictly creative. And it's like, hey, no,
Sure.
like there's a realistic point to this. Like, but it's your job to kind of shoot for the stars and do things that no one else is really doing. And then after that's all out on the table, after you regurgitate this 2-hour, 3-hour long direction or story, then we have to take a step back and go, all right, cool. Loved all these ideas. How do we reel it in and make it possible in 2025 or so on and so forth? Like, how do we make this a realistic thing?
Yeah.
Your approach, and there's just something infatuating about your approach, like the Rubik's Cube. I think that's a perfect way of describing it, because looking at it at the beginning, right? If you look at a Rubik's Cube at the beginning, it's all over the place. No one knows what the hell is going on. And then all of a sudden, the pieces start moving, and you're slowly developing and slowly starting to see not the end, but you're getting to the end until the final picture. If you haven't coined that already, you should probably coin that as like a Houston Howard exclusive, because very
like
cool
that.
way of explaining that.
Yeah, and it's a process. I mean, that's the thing. Like, this is not an algebra problem that we're trying to fix. It's let's get in the muck, let's get in the trenches, let's get in the mud of the creative soup, and then let's just sit there and spin ideas and spin this. But like, I understand tactically. It's just not just blue sky brainstorming. I understand tactically like the mechanics that I need, and then eventually, like, sometimes it can be frustrating, but eventually, like, you lock it in, you're like, yes, that's awesome, like that's super cool, and we could do this and this and this and this, and that's where the whole thing comes alive, right? And it's very empowering. A lot of times when you talk to someone about the transmedia process, initially it's overwhelming and scary to them, right? And because they're thinking of it from the outside in, of like, oh man, that's all this other stuff I have to do, and it seems intimidating, and it seems like I'm already like stretched to the max. Like, how do I add all this other stuff, and I don't know this and I don't know this. But when you're in the process, when you're in the soup with the Rubik's Cube, and I'm mixing all my metaphors here, but like when you're there and you're doing it and you're experiencing it and you get that Rubik's Cube clicked in, it gets so exciting. You're like, wow, okay, now, like, I get it. I see this, I see this, I see this, and like, and and ultimately, I think that comes from connecting in, like connecting in with what I call soapbox, which is the thematic premise and that flows out of the heart of the creator, and like clicking in world building in a very specific big way, like, and once we have those two big pieces, then all of a sudden the story potential pops in a way that then you don't feel intimidated anymore. Now you feel empowered. And it's because you have an engine that you're holding in your hands that becomes a very powerful thing. And now more than ever, I think it's the industry is such chaos right now, and that we need to find models, especially independently, that that creators can use to empower them to be able to push things forward in this crazy environment when you don't have $200 million, in your pocket for P&A and things like that. I think people have a $200 million P&A budget probably don't need Transmedia. I think the people that need Transmedia the most are the people that have $50 in their pocket, but they have a really amazing idea. And that's where I've seen, over the past several years, I've seen my interest turn to that of not, it'd be cool to like work with Lucasfilm on Star Wars and things like that. Of course, like that would be amazing. But really, like, what excites me is the guy that comes to me and says, listen, I got $10,000 to shoot this indie film. I got $100,000 to shoot this pilot episode. I got this really cool book, and I got $12,000 to do something with. Like, what do I do? And then it becomes, okay, let's figure this thing out, and let's kind of Rubik's cube this together, because then we empower new and different stories to be told, and survive in this crazy, chaotic market.
That's cool. And you're like literally making money work at that point. Like,
sure.
If someone approaches you to that extent of like, hey, let's just use the $100,000 pilot episode. In today's day and age, $100,000. I mean, for me as a filmmaker, I could find millions of ways to make a film for $100,000.
Right.
But to the average person, they go, well, what do we got to do? Because it can't only sit in a film, or it can't only sit as a pilot episode. Like, how do we go about getting the main thing across from a pilot perspective? But we're offering more than just a pilot episode. We're offering an IP. Like,
sure,
this is a pilot episode, but with this, we've built the beginning stages of an entire media enterprise ecosystem that only gets bigger as the pilot episode or this aspect extends forward.
Well, like the stress and the struggle of the independent creator is you have to find your own financing, right? Like, you have to go out and find investors. And sometimes that's, traditional entertainment investors. Sometimes it's like your uncle who's a dentist, and you're trying to, hit him up for some cash to be able to hustle the dream. And what I found is the entertainment model as it is does not make sense to non-entertainment investors.
But does it make sense anymore in general, though? I guess is the overall problem in 2025. Like, does that model make sense anymore?
I don't think it does. I think the economics of the industry are completely changing, and that's why you're seeing a pivot to an IP approach to entertainment rather than the traditional 1997 Paramount Pictures type of approach. And it's it's fascinating when you look at the changeover in the industry of the studio system, where the big five studios are no longer those traditional studios. Now we have Netflix, and we have Amazon, and we have Apple, and we're seeing the major entertainment players really become more consumer brands that have pushed into entertainment, but all of a sudden consumer brands understand how to better compete in a commoditized market. And for the past 150 years, entertainment's never been commoditized. Go back 20, 30 years ago, it was too difficult and too expensive to be able to ever really make entertainment for like a normal person. Like, how are you supposed to make a movie in the 80s? Like, you couldn't. Like, the technology wasn't there, the distribution wasn't there. You had to, you could only go to certain companies and certain studios that had the access to the technology, had access to the resources to be able to create these things. And then even if you had something that you couldn't distribute it, then you had to go to a different company, or sometimes the same company, to distribute it. And that was the only way to do it, whether it was through a publisher for books, whether it was through a movie studio for movies. It was all the same game, which means it was very few people could ever create anything. And so what happened is you have a very high demand for entertainment, but a very low supply. And if you understand sort of basic economics, the law of supply and demand means that whenever there's high demand and low supply, that the supplier, whoever the supplier is in an advantageous situation, because there's more people that want stuff than there is stuff. Like it becomes, your stuff is more valuable. Now, what we've seen, in 21st century, we've seen the democratization of technology to a point to where, not just with production, but also with distribution, with the advent of the internet, with iPhones, with all the self-publishing, with podcasting. No longer is it a question of how can people make stuff. Like, we know how to make stuff and we know how to distribute stuff now through the miracle that is the internet. And so in an era where everybody can make stuff and everybody can distribute stuff, we now live in an era where there's lots of stuff. There's too much stuff. There's this oversaturation in the market with content. There's more movies on Netflix than I could ever watch in my whole life. I'll never be able to read all the books on Amazon. I'll never be able to play all the games on Steam. I'll never be able to consume all the entertainment in the world, which means the supply has now outpaced the demand. And when you have more supply than there is demand, all the economics then change. And you, excuse me, you have to then rethink the model, which when that happened, when the supply outpaced the demand, that's when you started to see the changeover from 1997 Paramount Pictures, right, into now more of the consumer brands coming in to control, because they've operated in commoditized markets for decades, right? Like Apple knows how to operate inside a commoditized market because technology is commoditized. Laptops are commoditized. What I mean by commoditized is that there's nothing's unique anymore. Like the thing that used to be precious and few is now, proliferated all over the world and is no longer special. There was a time when, you knew somebody had an iPhone and it was crazy. Oh, you got an iPhone? Wow, this is amazing. Now everybody has an iPhone, right? Like that. And so iPhones have become commoditized. Phones have become commoditized. Laptops have become commoditized. And so, being commoditized is a whole different way to approach an industry. When you're not commoditized and there's more demand than your supply, you have a completely different business model than when it's flipped. And so because Apple, because Amazon, because these other companies, they know how to operate in a commoditized market, all of a sudden then they'll say, hey, I'm going to take over the entertainment, and guess what? I'm going to start using the same tactics and the same approach to entertainment that I am with my books and with my technology and my laptops and my phones. And all of a sudden, you see the change in going from single channel entertainment to now branded IP, branded ecosystems, right? And that's the big shift. The problem is you have independent creators who are still in their mind thinking 1997 Paramount Pictures, right? They're thinking, I'm Quentin Tarantino in 1995 making Reservoir Dogs, and you may be artistically doing that, but when Tarantino made Reservoir Dogs back in the 90s, the market was completely different. And if he was approaching breaking in today, he would have to approach it in a very different way, because
and it worked.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I had a filmmaker who told me the other day. He said, Houston, releasing a film into this market, it's almost like being a needle in a haystack, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't think that's the right analogy. I think releasing a movie or content or a game or music or whatever it is into today's market is not being a needle in a haystack. It's being a needle in a needle stack. Because if you're a needle in a haystack, at least you're unique. But now you release, your indie horror film into the market. Guess what? There's probably 150 other indie horror films that are going to be released that year into the market across the world. You're releasing to a mobile game into the market. There's going to be, 2,000 other mobile games hit the market in the same year. Like, what we're doing is no longer unique. And it may be like unique to you in your heart, and your grandma and your wife and your kids all find it very unique, but really the market is no longer unique, which means it changes audiences, it changes business models, and we have to approach it in a very different way of branded ecosystems. And now we got to be scrappier. We got to approach it now as an entrepreneur would approach a consumer brand.
I was just about to say that
it's a
it's
completely
now
different thing.
And I think that's why the commoditized market makes sense because these businesses that are out there selling a product understand, not saying they're going in there with the mindset like, hey, we can lose money on this, but they go
Right.
in there with the mindset of like, if we lose money on this, we're not below water. Whereas a studio that's releasing a film in today's market is like, hey, like we got to find a way to be net positive in some way, whether it's selling the IP or doing this,
Sure.
because if we're not, we can go under.
Sure.
So I think those discussions make more sense. I like approaching things from an entrepreneurial mindset. I began my entrepreneurial journey in 2019 before COVID actually hit. So
Sure.
understanding things like that and just like the basic things, I think just goes a long way from a creative side because it allows you to put the creative hat on when you need to, but then you take it off and put the business hat on because then you have those actual conversations like, does this make sense? Is this feasible? Is there longevity in moving forward with this? Should we not do this? It kind of brings that realism conversation into
Sure.
it,
Sure.
but then adding that transmedia aspect to it of like, again, we'll use that $100,000 budget. Like, hey, sure, a creator comes and says, I have $100,000 for a pilot, and looking to rework that and go, well, you actually have $100,000 for an IP.
Yes.
Let's find a way to capitalize on that. You're
Yes.
now that $100,000 on paper looks like $100,000, but to a company looks like $1,000,000
Yes.
because they're able to commoditize bits and pieces of whatever you're bringing to them because it's not just one piece. You're bringing multiple pieces of the puzzle. You're not
Sure.
just bringing one piece.
And you know, and one going back to the lawyer stuff, you know, with my lawyer hat on, is when you know, I think the worst thing that anybody can do is I don't see the worst thing anybody could do. That's not true, but like a mistake that I think a strategic mistake that people can make is go directly to a studio and try to sell a film or try to sell a pilot directly to the studio without first establishing it in the market. When you go to a studio and you sell a spec script, you sell a pilot, and what's going to happen if there's no market presence? It's an outright acquisition that they make. Like they take the whole bucket of stuff, right? It's just complete acquisition. If you can establish it in the market first through publishing, through podcasts, through whatever it is, then when you go to make a film and television deal, it's a different contract. Literally, you're forcing the lawyers to go get a different template that they use for a different contract because it becomes what's called a split rights deal. It's more like a license. I'm doing a split rights license for you, the production company or the studio, to have the film and television rights to you know, exploit the IP in that way, but you reserve the other rights for the IP. I'll reserve publishing, I'll reserve video games, I'll reserve all these other things because you establish it in the market first. And so it's vitally important that you don't just run and say, I want to sell my script. One, I think today's market makes that it's harder than ever to do that at all. But now, if you take the time to go ahead and say, I got $100,000 for an IP, I'm gonna, you know, or I got $100 for an IP. Let's figure out how to start. You know, how do we launch a podcast? How do we launch a webtoon? How do we start pushing stuff on social? Not promotional, but seeding the IP as story, like in these digital platforms, to start to build audience and to have a market presence with the IP. All of a sudden now, I'm one better leveraged and better positioned to even get a conversation to even try to sell anything. But in the event that I do sell something, it becomes a license deal rather than an outright acquisition, which is better for you as a creator. So like, as everyone's like fake manager and fake lawyer, I would say, you know, always figure out how to use a transmedia model to help build an audience early, ever before you make a film and television deal. Most people think of transmedia as back end transmedia, like after I make my movie, then I'll think about transmedia of how to extend it and expand it. That's great too. You should do that too. But really, I think the most valuable transmedia for independent creators is early. Is how do we get out there early before there's a deal, before there's a release, and that takes an entrepreneurial mindset. Like, you have to think of some different things, and you have to have a little bit of a hustle there. And sometimes people don't want to do that. But my brother's a chef, for example, and you know, if he wants to open a restaurant, he just can't say, I don't want to think anything. I just want to think about like the recipe for my dish, and that's it. right? The like, you know, as a restaurateur, if you're opening your own restaurant, it forces you to think in different ways, in different, and you have to think of front of the house and back of the house, and how do I order stuff? And then also the key, I think, when like with entrepreneur, but not entrepreneurial approach to this, is how do I get as many customers as possible?
For the
How do,
least amount.
like that's the number one thing with starting a business, is how do I and I think we get fancy as entertainers when we think, you know, like you're making stuff for the auteur, like as the for like the niche audience and the exclusive audience. But really, an entrepreneur is like, I need everyone to be my customer. I need everybody to come in my pizza shop. I need everybody to buy my shoes. I need everybody to buy my stuff. So how do I now use this thing called product diversification as a way to broaden the demographic reach of my brand and my business? So all of a sudden, you know, if I'm opening a restaurant, I'm not just going to sell one type of a dish. Like, I'm not just going to sell fettuccine Alfredo, right? Because like, what if you don't like pasta? And what if you don't like it? You seem like a guy who likes pasta, Ralph. You seem like you like some fettuccine Alfredo.
Was
So,
it the last name that gave it away?
yeah,
I
a
don't
little
know.
bit. So like it, but like, what if you don't like, you know, Alfredo? Why don't you like the fettuccine? Okay, cool. Well, like, let's do something. Let's do, you know, a steak. What if you don't like steak? Well, what about this? And what about this? And all of a sudden, now I have a menu with like 7 or 8 different things on it. Of course, I'm going to have a menu with 7 or 8 different things on it, because if I only have a menu with one thing on it, guess what? I've limited my customer base. Which means I've limited my ability to drive top end revenue to my restaurant, and I'm probably going to go out of business soon. So I need to try to diversify the offerings that I have. But and I'm not only going to sell entrees, but maybe some appetizers and also desserts, and I'm going to add some wine in there, and I'm going to add maybe some coffee, and I'm going to add some things to where if you don't want like a big meal, people can come in, have a cup of coffee, have a dessert, and all of a sudden I've increased my customer reach that way. Entertainment creators don't have that mentality. They think, I'm just going to make my thing for like that one type of customer, and it becomes problematic, especially when you have to find your financing from people who look at business plans all day, and you typically have made their money in business that is rooted in product diversification. And then they look and say, so you want me to give you $10,000 for a short film, and you're just going to put it in festivals? Like that, and that business plan doesn't make sense to like the business person, because they're thinking diversified product lines, broader customer reach, all these other things. And the more we can start to adapt our mindset as creators to match the mindset of the financiers and the business people, all of a sudden then we start to be congruent with the model that it takes to survive a commoditized market. Now you say, well, that sounds icky. Like, I got to conform my thinking to the businessman. Like, that's not really art. Well, it is, if you can make sure you connect the model to that thing I call soapbox, which is the fire in your belly and the purpose of the project. And if the thing that is driving you, the reason you want to make this project is because of this one specific purpose that you're super passionate about, all of a sudden you become evangelical about the project, and you want the project to get to as many people as possible, which means you're going to naturally diversify it in this other way. I was talking to a guy who had made this amazing film about fatherhood and the importance of fathers in the home, right? I mean, you're a new dad, I'm a dad, like it resonated with me. And he said, I just see this as a movie, right? And I said, okay, like tell me why you made this movie. And he said, well, my dad left when I was 8 years old, and I grew up without a father, but I had a stepfather that came in and became that father figure, was strategic and important in my life, and I realized who I was for the time that I didn't have a dad was very different than the time when my stepfather was there, and it changed me, and he taught me how to be a dad myself, and it was this amazing purpose. And I said, well, why don't all men need to hear that message? And he said, yeah. I said, guess what? My nephew is sitting in his bedroom and playing video games for 16 hours a day. Like, he'll jump on Fortnite, he'll jump on all this stuff. Like, he doesn't watch movies, he doesn't go to the movies, he doesn't watch TV, he doesn't read books. Like, him and his friends, they play Call of Duty, they play Fortnite, they do all the stuff, and that's all the entertainment he consumes. But he's a 25-year-old guy, right, or 22-year-old guy, however old he is. I was like, doesn't he need to hear this message? He said, well, of course. And I said, the only way you're going to reach that kid with the message of the importance of fatherhood is through a video game. That's it. Like, if you limit your reach to a movie, there's a lot of dads that will never hear that message. So you now are in the business of not filmmaking. You're in the business of taking this message that's in your heart and transforming it into something that can become all things to all people, right? In the way that's relevant for them. You're now a storyteller with purpose, not just a filmmaker. You're a storyteller driven by purpose who has a skill set of a filmmaker. But let's figure out how do we broaden that base, right? And all of a sudden, when you click over into that, and then you figure out the model that to build the engine that allows you to do that, that's when you stop being fancy. Like, you stop being like the swoopy haired, like, hipster creative film guy, right? And you start now being somebody that's going to impact the world in a major way. And that's, I think that's the exciting part about Transmedia.
Yeah, and I love the comparison of how you get from film like to video game, because it's those people. So people that are listening to this, and I think something that maybe we can hopefully piggyback on is, so the idea of under the entrepreneurial mindset. That's not something that I don't think everybody has. I truly don't. It's something that you either, or maybe it's in you, and then something needs to click in order for it to be unleashed, for lack of a better term. But a lot of times it stays dormant because there's a fear factor. There's all these elements that come into play. And it wasn't until I got into small business where it was like, oh, wow, I got to look at everything totally differently. Like, especially in small business, I'm balancing checkbooks. I'm doing everything behind the scenes, as well as being the front man for a lot of things. And that is what caused me to go, wow, like to approach certain stories and stuff that I'm doing and writing now. It's on Storytects website. Like, I'm full blown writing and just putting it out into the public, because I feel like for the past 5.5 years of my life, the creative side of me was just completely dormant and suppressed. Sure. So I'm like, nope, I'm just putting it out there. Hopefully people like it. If not, like, I'm going to learn from it. Yeah. But the people that are listening to this that don't have that, how can people go about getting that? Because it truly is, like, I truly agree 100% that if you're going into writing a story, writing a script with that mentality of let's use the 97 Paramount Pictures mindset, all it's going to be is another script in a briefcase somewhere, or in a filing cabinet somewhere else, and it's never going to see the light of day. Yeah. Without taking that jump to business, because people are going to hear this, they're not just going to do that. How do they start thinking that way of like, you know what I mean? I hope I'm trying to make it, I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but like, it's a thought process. It's something that's you once you jump into it, you learn as you're going through it. It's not like, it's like, oh, this is it. Like, now I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, no, there's ebbs and flows, and you get hit with obstacles, and you navigating the obstacles is what makes you a better business person, and so on and so forth. So the people out here that are like, well, what's the first step I should take? I'm curious what you believe would be, from a creative side, like, all right, like, this is what you should do. Like, take the leap, but here's how you should go about doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great question. And, I think of it like concentric rings, and that, I think the first place people should start is mine their own skill set. Like, what are you good at? And just ask what do you listen, there's 1,000 different things you can do in the transmedia model, right? And there's 1,000 different ways we could tell a story. That doesn't mean you have to do them all. It doesn't mean you should do them all. The first question is, what are you good at? Because it's rare that you ever find anybody who's only good at one thing. Usually people are good at a couple things. Like, usually, okay, you make movies, you know how to produce a podcast, and you know how to build a website, right? And you can shoot a film, right? And so you can put that together. Mine your own skill set and start there, and figure out how to maximize your own strengths in a way just to get an ecosystem going. So I was talking to a filmmaker out in New York City a few years ago, and she had the same questions. Like she said, I just make indie films. Like I make really low budget character, interesting art films, right? And she's like, how do I use the Transmedia model? I said, well, what are you good at, right? Because she was like, I don't understand VR, and I don't understand, like, she was thinking that Transmedia is technology, right? And Transmedia can involve technology for sure. But she's like, I don't know all the tech stuff, right? And I said, what are you good at? Like, what do you do? She said, well, I make movies, obviously, but I also paint and I also write poetry. I said, awesome. That's super cool. So listen, every movie you ever make for the rest of your life, you need to make the movie. And I said, you need to do a series of paintings that creatively tie into the story of the movie, and then you do a pop-up art exhibit that will start to hook people, not just with good painting, but also the story that you're trying to tell, and then connect it into the movie. Then write a bunch of poetry that is good poetry, but also extends the story of the movie, is connected into the movie, but also connected into the paintings. You can take all those individual poems, you can deliver them on TikTok, or maybe better yet, if you're not a technology person, you could assemble them and compile them into an anthology that you self-publish and put on Amazon, right? Or both, right? Like do the Amazon anthology as a revenue stream, but then also individually deliver them on TikTok. And then all of a sudden what happens is people that see your movie, and if they love your movie, will get the extended experience, while after the movie, they can now go check out the painting that extends the story that they love and find new and valuable information that extends that experience for them. And then from the movie, they're driven to the poetry, and then they find the poetry book. And then all of a sudden, you're building an ecosystem for the fans that see your movie. But also, if people don't know about your movie, and why don't they know about your movie? Because you don't have the P&A budget, and because the market's commoditized, and there's too much stuff, and you're a needle in the haystack, or you're a needle in the needle stack. So all of a sudden now your paintings become an entry point of people that don't know about the film. But if you could hook them in just the right way, then all of a sudden, then you can drive them to the movie, and then from the movie, drive them to the poetry. Or maybe there's people that see the poetry on TikTok, start following you, see that there's a poetry book on Amazon, get the book on Amazon because they like your poetry, but then go to the movie, and then go to the paintings, or then go to the paintings, then go to the movie. All of a sudden, you've created a nice little branded ecosystem for yourself without ever going outside of your own skill set. And all of a sudden you're doing transmedia. Are you doing VR? Are you using AI? Are you doing no? But you have a starting point, and you're thinking in the right way. Now, like once you have, I was talking to a game developer, and he said, Houston, I make mobile games in Europe. And I said, well, what else do you do? And he said, well, I'm a music producer, and I make websites as his day job. He's like a web developer. And I said, awesome. For every game you ever make for the rest of your life, you need to make the game, release an EP or an album of music that extends the story or extends the world of the game, then make it good music and make it cool, but then also do an interactive tie-in website that also goes deeper into the game and into the music, and you create that little ecosystem. He said, Houston, nobody does that. And I said, exactly. Like that's the whole point. Everybody else is doing it this other way. Let's figure out how to set you in a different line where you can now stand out as a creator and better compete in a commoditized market. Like it just makes sense. So once you have that going, then you start to look outside of your own skill set for collaboration. And start saying, okay, I can make movies, and I can paint, I can do poetry, right? But like, for, I don't know, like you know how to do, Ralph, you know how to make a podcast. You're obviously producing a podcast. That's something that I can't do. Would, would you want to collaborate, and we can hook up and we can jam and we can figure out some sort of like, JV joint venture opportunity for you to now add to this IP and add to this project. And then somebody else down the road knows, he's a writer who knows how to, write fiction and knows how to be a novelist, and say, hey, do you want to jump in the project and write a novel connected to this project? And then you're going to be connected to the podcast and also to the poetry and also to the paintings and also to the movie. And let's all three of us work together to build IP. Right. And because there's 1,000 million zillion gajillion people out there ready to work and ready to hustle and ready to collaborate. Right. And all of a sudden now you're giving people a sandbox to collaborate in. You may have to go through a few people before you find people you trust and click with and all that, of course. But once you find those people, now you've added to that skill set. Right. So you have your skill set in the inner ring. You have the next level of concentric rings being collaborators that have skill sets different than you. And then on the outer ring, I think you look at freelancers. I think you look at things like Fiverr and Upwork, and and you're saying, I need someone that can put together like a 2D platform or video game for me. All of a sudden, I can go find somebody in Estonia that can do that for me for $750, and all of a sudden, I can put that on Steam, and now I'm going outside of my skill set for a low cost using the digital platforms that are part and parcel of the miracle of the internet. And all of a sudden, guess what? I got like a little thing going on with my concentric rings, right? And it's just like this. But see, when people think about it all at once, it gets overwhelming and it gets frustrating. And I can't do it all myself. No, don't do it all yourself. Do certain things yourself, and then build those concentric rings. It's like Minas Tirith thing, Lord of the Rings, right? The way it's all set up. You got those rings. You think about it. Okay, cool. I got a couple things that freelancers are working on. I got a couple things that business partners are working on, and then the heart of the project is the stuff that I'm working on. And together we're working in a transmedia model. But guess what? None of us went to transmedia school. None of us got like classically trained in it. But we're doing the work of IP, right? And we're making great stuff. But here's the trick, Ralph, is none of that will work unless you have the fire in your belly. None of that will work unless you the transmedia model, all of entertainment, is, but especially in the transmedia model, it takes too long and it's too frustrating to do if you're not passionate about the subject matter. Like you have to have this gumption and the stick-to-itiveness and the grit that comes from the fire in your belly, the thing that's flowing out of your heart in this tremendous way. And in it, I'll just tell you a quick tidbit on this project that I'm working on. I'm working on a big crazy fantasy project, and it's probably the most ambitious thing I've ever done. It's during COVID, I decided just during quarantine, I was like, I'm just going to world build and not tell a story. I'm just going to world build as an exercise. And I spent 2 years building a world, and without ever, Tolkien spent 17, I spent 2, right? So I didn't go to the full Tolkien. I just, but at the end of that 2 years, and we got out of COVID, out of quarantine, I put together a world guide, and this world guide was like 750 pages long. Right. And it was this massively deep and interesting world. And I thought, okay, now I'm ready to tell a story. And so this is I'm in the middle of writing a novel, and, I have a bunch of stuff going on, and but I also I'm doing certain things myself. I've got business partners, creative partners that have pulled in that are doing other things that I can't do. I got a guy working on a series of kids books that kind of fold into the same world. He writes kids books. I don't write kids books, but we're doing it together. Then there's things that we're freelancing out, and I'm using my concentric rings to be able to prep this IP in this amazing way. But it's super frustrating, and it takes a long time, and it's hard to coordinate. But here's the thing: is last year, my mom died, and I appreciate that. It was, she'd battled cancer for several years. She died, and after she died, I I learned things about my mom in death that I never knew while she was alive. And I learned that, my mom had issues. But I learned things about her background she never told her kids. And she never, and she was a victim of terrible abuse, from her mom, and my grandma, which was surprising because my mom stuck by my grandma her whole life, and my grandma just died a year before my mom died, and my mom took care of her all the way to the very end. That's extremely loyal. But then I found out some terrible things about the way my grandma was a terrible mom. My mom was an awesome mom. My grandma was a terrible mom. And then I find out things about my grandma, Ralph, that I've that exploded my brains everywhere. And I finding all this stuff out, family comes in for funerals and you're just like talking and you start to get, spilling the tea, as the kids say. And I learned that my grandmother was sold, was sold at 14 years old to a brothel in West Virginia. She was, because her family was so poor that her dad sold her to a brothel for cash to take care of his other kids. And she was sex trafficked. I mean, sex trafficking, right? They didn't call it that back then, but that's what happened, right? My grandpa, right? My grandpa, so my mom's dad, I also found out was the son of a black woman and a white man, who were my great grandma, a woman named Lola, never knew her, and my great grandfather. They were an interracial couple that had my grandpa in West Virginia at the turn of the century, and being an interracial couple in the turn of the century is not highly looked upon. So then, my great grandpa gets drafted into the war, dies overseas. The town that my great grandma was living in, raising my grandpa, refused to feed her because they were racist. And she starved to death. They wouldn't sell her food in the market. They wouldn't share any food. She starved to death. Jeez. My great grandma named Lola, and my grandpa then got sent to an orphanage. And that's the only thing I ever knew about my grandpa, is he grew up in an orphanage. Well, at 12 years old, he left the orphanage because it burned down. He walked back to West Virginia, started working in a coal mine at 12 years old, right? Taken in by another coal miner who he worked with, and they lived together. Then later, at 17 years old, now my grandpa, working in the coal mine 5 years, goes to a brothel and meets my 14-year-old grandma.
That's
right.
Crazy.
He takes her out of the brothel, and they run away together. And they were like hunted down by the brothel guy who tried to kill them and to get her back. And it was this whole crazy story, right? But they got away, right? And they got married, had my mom, right? Well, my grandmother was she drank, she partied, she did drugs, she was sexually promiscuous, she cheated on my grandpa. She was a terrible wife and a terrible mother. She was abusive to my mom and her sisters, and physically abusive in terrible ways. But of course she was, because how could she not? She didn't have anybody to show her how to be a mom, right? And all of a sudden she took all that trauma that was put on her, and then she flowed it right to my mom. But guess what my mom did? My mom completely hid it, blocked it. All that generational dysfunction that had happened, she cut it off so that me and my brother and my sister never knew it. And we grew up completely normal, like suburban kids in a small town, like thinking that we had like a Leave It to Beaver family. And my mom was silently dealing with all this trauma, and she became a shield to me and my family. So that fascinated me. But at the same time, it fascinated me how loyal she still was to her mom, because she understood what her mom went through. But there was a decision that my mom had to make to cut off the dysfunction and cut off that generational curse and cut off that generational stuff. So you say, what the heck she's talking about? Also, for me, that became fascinating. And I thought, that what if in this fantasy world there was a woman who was say Wonder Woman, right? There was this magic system and she was amazing. And what if she was Wonder Woman? But what if Wonder Woman had kids? And then what if Wonder Woman had kids, but Wonder Woman was a terrible mother? And what if Wonder Woman was a terrible mother, not because she was just a terrible person, but terrible things happened to her? And all of a sudden we explore this idea of generational trauma and the people that decide to cut it off, while at the same time not forgetting who your family is. Like, that's big, right? And so all of a sudden I rolled all this stuff up into this crazy fantasy world. And so now all of a sudden that stuff right there is not just cool fantasy world in my head. It takes it from my head and puts it into my heart. And so now there's this fire that burns for that project, to where I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how difficult it is. I don't care how overwhelming the model is. I don't care how many freelancers and how many collaborators I have to work with. This thing has to happen, and I have to get this message out to as many people as possible, because I know so many other people that are dealing with this generational trauma that's being passed down and this dysfunctional family stuff, and it becomes a testament to my mom, of who my mom was, to cut that off so her kids never had to feel the trauma that she felt. So am I going to just stop? Just because, like, oh, this is hard, man. That's like, this is, no, I'm not going to stop. That becomes the gas in the tank that makes the engine work, right? You got to have the engine. You got to figure out like the model and all that stuff. But if that stuff's not there, dude, you're not going to make it through, right? You're just going to hop to the next project and hop to the next project. So like in a commoditized market, especially now, I implore everybody, find that thing that becomes the fire to the engine, the fire to the forge, right? I'm writing a new book, a world building book, and on the front of the book is this. It's a forge. It's this big iron ball that you see the fire inside, right? Because I think when you get into world building and get into transmedia models, that's what you need in order to make it all work, right? And now Jeff Gomez is very in line with that too. So I love talking with Jeff, because like, it's not about the bells and whistles and the tech and all the stuff, right? Like, what I love about Jeff is I always call him the transmedia philosopher, because like he takes it to a deep level. Like he takes it back to like his childhood and all this. Like he's just a deep dude. I like talking to deep dudes. That's why I like talking to you. And but it's like, it's that exploration of those things that create this evangelical drive to say, I gotta push this stuff out. And that's when you make awesome stuff that resonates with a lot of people. So it's a really long example, but there's something powerful in that. And I think that's what people lose. It's not just entrepreneurial mindset. It's entrepreneurial mindset plus the fire in your heart that work together to make something powerful in this market using a diversified multi-platform model.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay that. Like, it's crazy to think, because the amount of people that experience that, but will never, like, so I'll beat around the bush to get to the point I'm trying to get across, sure. Right? So I do things in my life because I know there's other people out there that don't have the strength maybe to go out and do it themselves, or
sure.
to come out and say something, or whatever it is, the wherewithal to do so, because they don't have the right medium or whatever it is. They just don't know how to do it, and they right. Don't feel comfortable doing it. So therefore they'd rather keep it bottled inside and not say anything.
Sure.
I'm an advocate of, okay, well, if I feel the same way, I'm just going to say it out loud, because now that's out loud. If you hear that, you go, wow, I'm not alone in this. I'm a huge right. advocate with always having somebody. I don't know where maybe that comes from childhood trauma somehow. Sure. I had a great childhood, so I don't know, but it comes from something. And I'm happy you went on that whole thing, because that's the basis of what, I can't believe I'm plugging my own podcast on my podcast, but that's the basis That's the basis of what Storytects is. I
Sure.
talked to Frank Conrath last week. I'm actually calling him after this. Like,
Oh, great.
the whole purpose of this is, sure, it's a platform for me to be creative, but the transmedia aspect is like, this is proof of concept for me. Like, this whole thing
Sure.
is a huge case study of like, podcasting works, the conversations with some of the best in the industry work, the creative ideas, do they draw enough attention? Does that work? Like,
Yeah.
all of this stuff is proof of concept. I'm putting it out there to the world.
Yeah.
Like, is there enough there? Is there not enough there? Because if there is enough there, there's something there. But eventually, and again, this is now to go back to this isn't going to stop. Like, it could be a year, it could be tomorrow, it could be 35, 40 years from now. It doesn't matter. The whole purpose of this is to give these people an opportunity. So the reason why I'm saying the opportunity is, so my whole story concept is this. I put script treatments out there. Like, here's the idea that I've been working on for how long. You should see my phone. It's ridiculous.
Right.
Of just like being out in public, like, this would be a great idea. Boom. And then I go home and I work on it. And then I built the format out so everything looks somewhat structured. So like when you look at the script treatment, at least it all everything looks the same.
Yeah.
I'm not a screenwriter at all. Like, I've won a couple screenwriting festivals because I had to win. Like, I had to write it. Not exactly the best thing, but like, I just had to do it to get the story out.
Sure.
The whole purpose behind Storytects is so that a community comes in here, and that writer that has a writer's block, that's like, dude, I don't have anything to write about, I have no idea what to do, potentially comes across a story concept and goes, man, I really want to write about this. Now, put that into Hollywood, you can't do that. Like, you're not, as much as I would love to write a 2-hour movie about Aragorn and Lord of the Rings, I can't do that because of all the legal things. I look at that and I go, I'm not going to do that. You want to write it? Well, guess what? Write it, do what you got to do. And if we like it, congratulations. Now we're going to find a way to make this aspect, and we're going to bring it to festival. We're going to do it. Same thing with character designers or things like that have that visual experience. Like, hey, I really love this world that you built on that episode. Like, I have this sick idea for this landscape. Cool. Come on board. Do it. What do you have? Put that as a portfolio bullet for yourself. Add to the IP so that at the end of the day, when this IP gets built and, knock on wood, it gets brought somewhere or somebody takes it and decides to make it their own at a studio level, well, congratulations. Now you're a part of the project. We're not just the other people in the background that's like, yeah, we'll take the idea and we're going to run with it. It's like, hey, you were here from the beginning. You took it. Love your ideas. Now you're a part of it. If this gets to that point, like, you're a part of the ride. Like, you're along with it the entire way. Fun. And that's where Storytects comes into play. So the reason, and I went on that whole tangent because it's that whole idea of the fire being burnt, of like, yeah, man, this is happening. I tell my wife, it's happening whether or not. Like, it's just happening.
That's it. It's happening. That's it, man. Like, there's this, this phrase called "burn the ships," right?
Oh yeah,
like
burn a boat.
Yeah, you know it. Like, there's just no going back, man. Like, you got to be committed, and that's the thing that separates people is this idea of grit. Like, the most successful people, what makes the most successful people successful? The biggest differentiator is grit, and which is really just the inability to quit. And it was interesting. Like, for me, everybody gets frustrated and has the temptation to stop and to quit. And man, I was in church, and this is a few years ago, and it was coming out of COVID. There was a lot of questions in COVID of like how things were going to change, and really God spoke to me and said, if you quit right now, you're going to lose the ability to have the authority to tell your kids not to quit. Like, your kids are watching. Your kids, like, our kids are watching us. And if I quit, I lose the moral authority to encourage my kids not to quit.
Dude, I'm so happy I talk to my wife about this probably 3 times a week because she asks, like not sleeping. I mean, sure, having a 6-month-old, also you're not sleeping because of the 6-month-old.
Sure.
But like, just being up and doing stuff, and it's like, why are you doing this? That for that same reason, because if I leave, if I don't do this, how can I then tell my daughter in the same breath to go after what she wants?
That's it.
Go after her dreams if her own father quit and didn't go after what he wants and went after his own dreams.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's happening now, but it can happen. You know what I mean?
Bro. Absolutely. I have a big Post-it note that's stuck on my laptop that says, "Don't quit. Your kids are watching." And like, I want to write that as a book. Like, don't quit. Your kid is watching. Like, and just, encourage people not to quit. Your kids are watching. Like, it's a big deal, right? But at the same time, in order to not quit, like maybe there are certain things that you should quit because they're just things you picked up that you aren't really passionate about. You're just doing it just to do it, right? And so, but like when you find the thing, when you find that thing in your heart, when you find that place of purpose and passion, all of a sudden now that's the thing. Let's not quit. I mean, I had a buddy at, who's a Navy SEAL, and he was telling me in SEAL training, and what's interesting is the point that you think you need to quit, and your body says you can't go anymore, and you're done, is about 40% of your capacity, and that all SEAL training is not like learning how to shoot better and do all the stuff. It's learning how to turn that switch off in your body and your brain so that you can go past that 40% capacity and hit that 100% capacity, right? And I think that's where people, and it's the same, it's analogous to everybody, to where we get to that point of frustration and we get to that point, this is hard, I don't think I can do it anymore. You're probably at about 40%. You can go further. Like, people are more resilient than they think. You got to have the gas in the tank to get there, right? But ultimately, like, that's my thing. So for me, I'm like, okay, cool. Let's keep going. Let's figure out how to use all the tools in the toolbox to be able to empower you to keep pushing forward. Because if you just keep trying to, I've done it, and I know so many of my screenwriter friends have spent 12 years shopping the same script, right? And sometimes those scripts are fantastic scripts, and they just like they just can't get a break, and they just like they do it, and I'm thinking, man, what if during the 12 years that you were shopping the script, you were also producing the podcast and running the Kickstarter and working the LinkedIn? And what if you were producing the short stories and you were self-publishing? Like if you were like, how could you really, if we go back 12 years, and if you could have maximized seeding the IP in the market with all the tools that we have, and the miracle that's the internet, and the democratized technology that we have, like if you would have done that for 12 years,
the script doesn't even matter at that point.
Right. Or you sell it, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, that's it becomes easy. And then that's where people feel regret, and then they feel like they missed out. And that's when they're the surly guy at the end of the bar, in East Hollywood, just sitting there saying, these, I could make movies better than this. And it becomes that guy. Right. And we all know that guy, right? Like, oh, well, if I were to ever had a shot, I would have made, it's like, oh man, I get how he got there though. Like he tried the one path. For me, it becomes like a quarterback sitting back on their own 1 yard line, just chucking Hail Marys down the field. And every now and then you see somebody else connect with a Hail Mary, and then you convince yourself, oh, if they did it, I can do it too, which is technically true. And so I'm just going to sit back there and just chuck the Hail Mary as far as I can. And even if I'm Joe Burrow, which I'm a big Joe Burrow Cincinnati fan, rep the Bengals here. But like, if I'm Joe Burrow, even if I'm Joe Burrow, it's difficult to connect on that Hail Mary pass. And guess what? Like, this, Frank. I mean, Ralph, you were talking about Frank earlier. I was telling Frank the same thing a few days ago, actually. Is you one day you're 27 and then you wake up and you're 47.
Yeah.
Like that. Like that's just a thing. That's a thing. Like, you wake up and you're 52 years old, and you realize, I've been chucking Hail Marys for 14, 20 years, 17 years, and I've never connected in the past. And I'm thinking, what if you would have taken that 14 years and ran the 5 yard off tackle, the 6 yard out route, like, the dive play that gets you 2 yards, and then you work your way up to at least the 50. Yeah. And I would rather try to throw a Hail Mary from the 50 than back my own one. Right? You can tell I'm missing football at this point. Like, that's,
I'm all about it. I love it.
But you get what I'm saying. Like, that's, and for me, that's tragic. Like, that people just, that they thought that that was their only the shot. That's all they could do because they view themselves. I'm just a filmmaker. I'm just a screenwriter. That's all I do. And all I am is a Hail Mary passer. That's all I am. No, 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 you're not. Like, you're more. Like, you have to elevate your vision and elevate how you view yourself personally. You're now, you need to be a storyteller. You need to be a
Mm-hmm.
storyteller that is talented in multiple ways, one of which is a screenwriter, one of which is a filmmaker, one of which is a podcaster, whatever your thing is. Like, that's one skill that may be your main skill, but let's look at the other stuff as well. And once you elevate your vision a little bit and say, I'm a storyteller that has this burning forge in my heart for this project that I'm connected to, then the opportunity for expansion is pretty amazing. That's where the transmedia model sinks.
I love that. I love that. I know we're pressed for time. I do want to just one more thing. Where you're at in your career now. I don't want to give too much away. I know you're doing a lot of head of transmedia storytelling, which is a pretty cool title to have. Can you dive into a little bit what projects you're working on, the companies or businesses you're working with, what that entails?
Sure. So right now I'm doing a couple things, working with a video game company on a super exciting international video game project, doing all the transmedia and IP buildings, world building for them, which is really great. Also working with a company out of Atlanta. It's a new studio that's launching in Atlanta. That's called the Grammarly. Will be rebranded the Story Plant, where they're going to be centered on publishing and how do we support publishing efforts with transmedia as a way to then grow into film and television. And they own the entire pipeline. So they own the books and they own the movies, and they're putting them together so that you have that pure continuity of the fidelity to the story is there. It's an amazing group of people that have a big vision, and they're all very amazing story people. So very excited about the work with Grammarly, the work with the video game company, work on this fantasy project myself, getting ready to release a world building book here in hopefully a couple months. If I can, I think I have a pretty well finished, but looking to push that out and really get that in the hands of people, because ultimately I think a lot of people have trouble with transmedia because there's a world building issue that doesn't optimize it for transmedia. So that's sort of my follow-up nonfiction book. So definitely staying busy, but also very excited. Also working with a kids brand called Global Galactics, which is working on a lot of really amazing, empowering kids stuff. And as a dad, working on kids stuff that can inspire and challenge kids to look up, look around, and look within in an era, in a way of in a world of digital technology is something that I'm very passionate about as well. So definitely got a lot of plates spinning. But what I've done is I've diversified myself.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, one project like stalls, I guess what? I got other projects to lean on, and I got other things to lean on, right? But I teach at the Art Center College of Design, where I teach intro to transmedia storytelling, advanced transmedia storytelling, world building. Teach a video game class called Advanced Quest and Mission Design. So when COVID went down, or when COVID took everything down and production down, guess what? Education didn't stop. So diversifying my own product line is a path for professionals, right? In a commoditized environment, right? You're not just one thing. You're more than one thing. And that's the big, that's my big message for everybody, whether you're creative or whether you're professional or both. Like if we can hit that note, then all of a sudden I think the song of our lives become, our professional lives and our creative lives becomes a lot sweeter to hear.
That's awesome. That's incredible. What a message. Houston, I want to thank you so much. I think a solid message to get across from here, especially towards the end of this, is, practice what you preach, especially in the creative world. And I think it shows, like, you're a product of your environment at this point. Like, you did so much in the past how many years that you're able to diversify your skills and talents. And not only that, teach it to other people for them to get a leg up. That's why we're having this conversation today. I still remember the first day of film school in 2016. The first class at LA Film School, and how many years have gone by, and the times we've caught up and chatted. So I'm blessed to sit here and have you on the pod. I'm also blessed to call you a mentor and a friend. So I appreciate your time and for coming on here today, man.
Absolutely, brother. Appreciate it.
Awesome. We'll talk soon.